Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. And just earlier today, we got ourselves yet another build for the War Within Alpha, with a few new hero specs for us to test out, but also plenty of new class changes for us to discover. This includes adjusting talents and even base class abilities for a handful of playstyles, while also completely revamping certain specs as well, as we're seeing some of the more smaller changes for Retribution, but also some of the larger changes for Demonology and the Arcane Mage. And it looks like mages are essentially getting almost a whole nother revamp for this expansion, even though it feels like just recently they got a talent revamp back during the earlier days of Dragonflight. But the changes we're seeing to Arcane Mages are really good so far, whether on paper or whether in practice, because what they're trying to do is try to take down some of the complexity that has been built up over the Arcane Mage, try to give him new talents as well as gameplay opportunities to remove that whole feeling of a rotational script that has been built up over this last expansion, to give more players the opportunity to pick up Arcane from the get-go and start enjoying the spec more immediately. So in today's video, I want to take a look at everything we have so far regarding the Arcane Mage, which is personally my favorite mage spec ever since the expansion of Legion. But right before we get into the updates coming to the spec of Arcane, most of you guys watching these kind of War Within Alpha updates are still not subscribed. However, the more of you remind, the more of you do, so let's keep it going. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell if you're watching these videos anyway. Especially if you want to get more regular content regarding Dragonflight patch 10.26, 10.7, Season 4, or any of the future War Within updates. So let's first go over some of the basic goals that they wish to accomplish with mages in the War Within Alpha. For all three specs, they want you to be able to grab as many of your base class tools without spending too many talent points into it, giving you plenty of points to invest into a variety of different builds and playstyles so you can better customize how you want to play your class. Second, they also want to simplify some of the rotational complexity that comes with playing Frostfire and Arcane. This doesn't mean making the base playstyle of those specs easier, but rather some of the more top-end complexity is being reduced or reworked to be not as overwhelming. And they also want to give you more talents so you can better customize your playstyle so you can adjust your specs build for a variety of different combat situations, which is always good to see. For Arcane Mages in particular, they're trying to hit it from a couple of angles, the first one being adjusting how Radiant Spark works. Radiant Spark is a very powerful talent in Dragonflight, and it's a strong setup talent that allows you to unleash the most value out of your big setup combos that Arcane Mages are known for. But Radiant Spark also creates quite a bit of complexity in your overall rotation. Basically, Arcane Mages, as they play right now on the live, you're almost required to memorize a very long rotational script. You don't really memorize your basic rotation and cooldown rotation, but rather your script includes the very first global all the way through your burst into your mini burn and then back towards your burst. It's just so scripted that it's sometimes very difficult for players to adapt and adjust to what is required out of Arcane to be played optimally. So Radiant Spark is going to be adjusted to be a new choice node in the same row as where it normally is. They want to be able to capture the essence of Radiant Spark, so they're switching it to a talent called Magi's Spark. A Touch of the Magi now also conjures a spark, since you would normally pair a spark and Touch of the Magi together. They kind of fuse them in one. When you create the spark, you increase the damage dealt by your next Arcane Barrage, Blast, and Missiles by 25%. After the enemy receives damage from all three of these abilities, the spark then explodes, dealing additional arcane damage to nearby enemies. It just basically becomes a burst combo that is part of the Touch of the Magi, while retaining the Touch of the Magi's coalescing damage aspects. Though now there's a new choice between Magi Spark as well as an alternative route, which is improved Touch of the Magi, which allows Touch of the Magi to accumulate 25% of the damage you deal. This essentially allows Touch of the Magi to retain its original form but just get a little bit stronger. And it's a different way of approaching the playstyle while still focusing on amplifying the Touch of the Magi windows. With this, they also adjusted the capstones that kind of trail off of Magi Spark or improved Touch of the Magi, with things like Arcane Echo, a familiar talent, where direct damage to enemies afflicted by Touch of the Magi, it'll cause an explosion of arcane damage to nearby enemies, with a bit of a soft cap at 8 targets. Alternatively, you can also pick up Concentration, where Arcane Blast has a small chance to make a next cast of Arcane Blast free of mana, allowing you to fuel even more spellcasts into the Touch of the Magi window. And lastly, you have a new capstone choice of Nether Munitions. When Magi's Spark or your improved Touch of the Magi detonates, it increases the damage of all affected enemies around Touch of the Magi, which gives you a little bit more of this burst window that with Spark can actually be added as part of a Touch of the Magi go. Next, when it comes to giving mages a little bit more freedom on how they customize the playstyle, they wanted to give some opt-in complexity to allow arcane mages opportunity for skill expression, but also offer players an alternative route as well, while creating an opportunity to even free up some of your rotational keybinds a little bit. We see this easily in a talent of Presence of Mind, which can be utilized inside of a Touch of the Magi window to get 2 arcane blasts towards the tail end of the ability to add a little bit extra punch towards the end of that call as burst. However, alternatively, you can now pick up the Wizened Wit talent, which reduces the cast time of Arcane Blast by 10%. Removing a keybind that you would need to use as part of a Presence of Mind, but also giving you an alternative to the bursty Presence of Mind with a little bit of a sustained shortened cast times of Arcane Blast for more consistency. Another ability that's going through a few changes is Arcane Missiles. The Arcane Missiles right now in Dragonflight are a fairly strong toolkit, but in some cases and with certain builds, especially in PvP, they can become part of your core filler ability taking place of Arcane Blast. While I'm usually a big fan of being able to alter your rotation in a variety of different ways, and I'm a big fan of mages playing around Arcane Missiles as a possible filler ability, the devs felt that it was a bit disruptive towards the overall Arcane playstyle. So Arcane Missiles are going through a pretty bold change in the alpha, where they can now only be cast with clear casting. However, they also wanted to make sure that even though you're not going to be able to spam missiles as much as you want to, when you do get to use them, that damage should feel a lot more exciting. So a lot of new talents are being introduced to help modify the power of clear casting, but also the power of missiles as well. We see this with simple talents such as Eureka. When a spell consumes clear casting, its damage is increased by 25%, fueled directly into your missile's cast. A new talent of Arcane Battery allows you, whenever you consume clear casting, to gain spell damage by 2% for 25 seconds, stacking up to 10% maximum. With the talent of Time Loop, every time you gain a stack of Arcane Battery, you have a small chance to gain another stack of Arcane Battery, and this effect can proc off of itself. Together, this combines into a talent called Aether Attunement. Whenever you gain 5 stacks of Arcane Battery, you get to consume all of those stacks in order to gain Aether Attunement. With Aether Attunement, your next Arcane Missiles will deal additional increased damage to your primary target and will fire up to 4 nearby enemies, turning missiles into a cleave-based ability. This is, in essence, both the Arcane Battery as well as Aether Attunement is the current Dragonflight Arcane Mage tier set being added as a talent option. What's fun about this talent is it allows missiles to become a cleave ability, which I enjoy playing around with over on live realms. But this also, with all these different clear casting changes, allows for certain specs such as the Spellslinger hero spec to shine in some cases, especially with your Capstone Splinter Storm ability. Whenever you have 8 active splinters on enemy targets, and that's a whole nother mechanic we can go into, your character will then cast a Splinter Storm, which has a 20% chance to grant you clear casting, which allows you to fuel some fairly sizable arcane missile windows. Another aspect of Arcane they wanted to tackle is its overall class complexity, where you are going to see certain talents being on the more complex side, which is more of the familiar old-fashioned Arcane that we've seen over the last few expansions. But they also want to try to find good balance between skill expression and alternative yet powerful options. With simple fixes such as Arcane Familiar, which is now going to be tied to simply pressing Arcane Intellect. So Arcane Familiar is no longer has to be its own button, just by buffing yourself you gain Arcane Familiar for free. And now you can even buff little aspects like Arcane Familiar during Time Warp and other similar effects. Your Familiar will now fire 4 bolts instead of 1. And the damage from Arcane Familiar has a small chance to grant you up to 2% of your maximum mana, allowing you to play around with your primary resource. But then we also see adjustments to things like Nether Precision, where normally this ability is primarily used for single target damage. Now it can be utilized for AoE, since Nether Precision not only supports Arcane Blast but also Arcane Barrages, increasing their damage by 20%. This can be further augmented into the talent of Lay Sight, where Nether Precision damage is being bonus amplified. And if you want to go further for some arcane cleaving, Lay Drinker allows every 6 times you gain nether precision for your next arcane blast to echo, repeating its damage at 25% effectiveness to a nearby target and up to 2 nearby enemies, giving that single target damage a little bit more cleave. And this also doesn't even go over all of the other talents that I've now seen a slightly different position. While all of them retain a lot of that familiarity, their different position does give you a little bit more freedom in how you can better customize your overall playstyle of the Arcane Mage. Overall, I found the new version of Arcane in this early alpha build, which is something worth to consider. This isn't the final product, this isn't the final version of the class, but what they got working so far in this most recent alpha build has actually been a bit of a breath of fresh air. I'm somebody who started playing Arcane Mage, I believe it was way back in Legion, and I meddled around with Fire Mage a little bit during Battle for Azeroth, but every single time I kept coming back to Arcane. While the spec at first does look like a 4-button spec, there's so much extra complexity with how you use your cooldowns and how you manage your mana, and the way that the spec has been shaped and changed over the last few expansions has been quite wild. I enjoyed it a lot during its earlier, simpler days way back in Legion, where mana management and proper cooldown usage was all you needed to worry about. But I also enjoyed some of the more wild versions of the spec, like back in Shadowlands with the Kyrian Arcane, which utilized the Arcane Missile ability and mana in order to essentially make missiles your filler ability, and then combine it with a couple of legendaries and talents and the main Kyrian ability in order to create for a very fun but also a very powerful and kind of a complex bursty design. And even this current version of Arcane, even though this is probably one of the more complex versions of this spec, I still do enjoy it to this day. Definitely one of the more harder specs for most newer players to pick up, but I've always enjoyed puzzles and I've always enjoyed breaking things down into smaller parts, and learning little smaller bits of Arcane and then being able to put those parts together has been one of the more fun things for me when it comes to the difficulty but also the enjoyment of the spec. Once you figure out how all of these little parts work and you start to put them together effectively, that's where the fun begins. And when they added the barrage interaction with your arcane orbs for AoE and PvP, I think that's where it really started to take off for me. So far, this early version of Arcane does try to simplify it a little bit while retaining a lot of its fun elements that I was originally drawn to. And I cannot wait to see how this spec continues to evolve over the next few updates over on the War Within Alpha. But that's going to be it for me. I want to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on some of this recent changes and the recent big rework coming to Arcane Mages in the next expansion? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.